well, not a lot more of us, but there are more of us. We're a small independent game studio. We generally say that we're based in LA, but that's less and less true as people are moving out and and we're bringing on people from all over. So maybe we're based on the immaterial plane now. So that's accurate.
Feels that way.
Totally. Yeah.
Feels that way. Okay. I'm Sam. I'm the founder of the studio and creative director of Where Cards Fall, designer on Blaseball.
I'm Joel, designer on Blaseball, and built the simulation of Blaseball as well.
Steven, I'm a designer, writer on Blaseball.
Yeah, and both of you worked on Where Cards Fall too.
Worked on Where Cards Fall.
That we did.
Just a reminder.
Yeah.
Yep. What'd you do on Where Cards Fall?
I was tools engineer, tools and gameplay engineer.
I came on kind of later in the game as to help with narrative and the narrative design and writing of Where Cards Fall.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, our studio it's a fairly unique studio. We've created 2 games so far that are very different from each other on the surface. One of them is it's a beautiful slice of life puzzle game without any words to it, and then the other one is an entirely text-based simulation, so sports simulation game. So on the surface, they feel like they're worlds apart, but both of them kind of stem out of like out of the evolving design philosophies that we have with our approach to narrative design. So we want to like preface this talk by to talk about narrative projection. All art invites projection, so we don't want to claim that we're saying anything here that any of you that's going to be brand new information to any of you. But we want to talk a little bit about our approach to this and how it informs our design philosophies.
Right, and when we say narrative projection, we're talking about kind of like asking the viewer or the player or the reader to participate and bring their own narrative to match what narrative you're offering. Or more or less, I mean, like Sam said, this is something that happens all the time across all mediums. But it's something that's really, I think it's important. It's core to our philosophies, but it's important to remind yourself of and think about it in new ways and just constantly just remind yourself of how to do this in your own design. So.
Do you want to tell them Where Cards Fall is?
What these games are, yeah. So where Cards Fall, Where Cards Fall is a slice of life puzzle game where you're building houses of cards to bring formative memories to life. It's structured like a logic puzzle game, and you're moving and shuffling these like card houses through 3-dimensional puzzle spaces. And as you do so, you're revealing this wordless coming of age story. If you've played games like Portal, if you've played games like Steven's Sausage Roll, you'll probably really enjoy it from a puzzle standpoint. They're very challenging puzzles. They're all about kind of spatial awareness. If you enjoy games like Inside or games like Eco, the way that the narrative unfolds has some similarities to those games too. And for Blaseball, which one of you would like to introduce that?
Oh, Blaseball's weird. Blaseball, it's a massively multiplayer, absurdist horror, fantasy baseball simulation.
Legacy game.
It's a legacy game. We've called it many, many things, and the joke is it's impossible to explain. But I mean, we're here. We kind of have to. You can find it at blaseball.com. It's a website where this league is happening week on week. This is a game which encourages fans to organize to help their team compete in weekly seasons, survive strange horrors. And yeah, there's like an election every week where you can vote and influence how the league changes, whether it's global rules or adding to the design of systems or just boosting your team or your favorite players. So it's a live game. There's games running right now. It's day 97 of the season. Every season is 99 games. So if you went to blaseball.com right now, you'd see
You'd see the Wild low just locked up right now in a fight for the postseason is what you would see.
Yeah. So there's two. It's Internet League Blaseball. There's two sub leagues, the Wild and the Mild League, and we're right in the heat of the postseason race. So in the next couple hours, we'll see who makes it from the Wild League. There's 6. Is there still 6 teams in contention?
There's still 6 teams in contention. Yeah, the Mild League is all locked up for anybody that's jumping in for the first time.
Yeah.
And the Worms, the Ohio Worms, are desperately hoping that, well, both them and the Breckenridge Jazz Hands are desperately hoping that one of the teams ahead of them goes 0-3 so that they can sneak into the playoffs. But
how are the Firefighters doing right now? It's
we just watch Blaseball.
Yeah, if this gives you an idea, this is a simulation that's running. We made the game. We don't even know what's going to happen. There's a lot in Blaseball. It's very fun. It's fun to keep up with and just see and follow. You know, I like the Jazz Hands. I want to see them make the postseason. So I'm keeping a close eye on the site and on all these just different interacting systems that are happening right now.
And it's a weird game, as Joel said. So, you know, it's not just about the sports elements. If you're not into sports at all, that's totally fine. There's a lot of interesting things happening right now around the game. Like, players are disappearing. We have salmon that are swimming upstream and reversing innings. Like, it's a
cursed baseball league ruled over by malevolent forces. And it changes every week due to broken democratic systems, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good.
Yeah.
So, but like, okay, those seem very different, right?
Right.
But I think that there are some kind of shared foundational design intentions and interests that drive both. That we kind of have broken into a number of like rules that we set for ourselves, not really rules, but you know, just like I said, intentions. Do we want to jump into what the first one is?
I think we should.
So the first one's basically just getting the hell out of the way.
Right.
What do we mean by that?
I would start by, like, when we talk about narrative projection, we're talking about like leaving space for the player, right? Like leaving space for the player's narrative. And so a lot of the time it just means pulling back, you know, like not telling every single piece of the story that you have to. It's, you know, finding where you as the designer and as the storyteller, you know, don't have to tell a part of the story, where you can like step back and, you know, let the player fill in the gaps.
Yeah. This is a lesson that like I learned from other game writers and narrative designers that have made things that I respect a lot. And, you know, I think I'm basically just stealing from Tom Bissell and Rob Otten's GDC talk forever ago. But like, you know, one of them at that talk said that like a narrative designer's job is to like control tone, theme, and provide like just enough narrative context for the player to feel like they're authoring their own experience. The last thing that we want to do is force something on the player that I think interrupts that kind of three-pronged connection between, you know, the player, the game world, and that central mechanic that should be driving the experience. So we as designers are kind of trying to constantly make sure we're giving you just enough where we're not then interrupting that relationship.
Right.
Yeah, and games are in interactive forms. So we want you to be following your own curiosity, and we want you to be telling us what you're curious about. So if there's a particular, say, object in a room that you can sense has a lot of history to it, and you want to dive into that, by all means. But if you want to ignore it too, that's totally okay. If that means in a game like Blaseball, following one particular player and seeing exactly where they're going, how their story unfolds over the course of a season, we want you to be able to do that as well. So getting out of the way it's both like letting you tell us what you want to focus on and also respecting your choice and not focusing on the things that aren't interesting to you.
So yeah, how does that kind of manifest in where cards fall, for example? Does anybody want to jump in on that?
Sure. Well, where cards fall, the narrative itself, it doesn't it doesn't try to interrupt your play experience. So your play experience is solving these very kind of separated puzzles. The narrative is backgrounded during that time. So every single puzzle is themed differently. You're going through a very discrete set of mechanics. One of our goals for the game was to use a small number of mechanics to say as many things as we possibly could have them say. So the game itself is told through memory. You're going through the memories of about 10 years of our lead character's life. And as the puzzles grow in complexity, the memories start to become a little bit more nuanced as well. But we don't interrupt the puzzles at any point to deliver you information. We always are keeping that kind of separated and more in the background. And as you are playing the game, a lot of our players found that they didn't necessarily pick up on the narrative at first, and the more they played, the more they realized that they were absorbing a lot of the pieces in a more kind of subconscious way.
I think that also then is echoed in or help reinforces like what the conceit of the narrative is, which, like, to give anybody that hasn't played it or is looking forward to playing it without spoiling too much, it's about MC is our main character and where cards fall, and they are reflecting back on kind of the foundational experiences and memories that had gotten them to this point in their life and trying to make sense of that. And so, a lot of the progression through the story is just by solving these puzzles and hitting these landmark memories. But every puzzle in and of itself is a memory, and there are very specific choices with regard to like the art direction and sound that is in the background of even those puzzles that are telling the story, even if subconsciously, so that when you're getting to these like more explicit landmark moments, even if you haven't been fully paying attention to it, you've been kind of building the context or searching through these moments, some of which are even interstitial moments that might not seem super important, but when you look back on them might be foundational for MC as they are doing that same thing.
Right. And I think what Stephen's getting at a little bit is like environmental narrative, which is a very strong point of where cards fall. As you're solving the puzzle, there's tons in the environment that set up the context for the memories you're going to see shortly after that. An environmental narrative is just a great example of kind of getting out of the way. It's something that you can offer to the player. Sort of, it's if they choose to notice it, if they choose to read into it and explore that, they can. But it's not a mechanic. It's not a forced interaction of some sort. It's something that is there if they choose to experience it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because at the end of the day, Where Cards Fall is a puzzle game, and we wanted to make sure that the emphasis is on solving fun, challenging puzzles. Sam, did you want to maybe talk about, like, there are those kind of interstitial landmark memories and what the choice is there?
Yeah. So the structure of the game goes like this: you are playing through these spatial puzzles, and at the end of every one of these, you've created a card structure that kind of encapsulates the memory that the puzzle contains. So when we match the euphoria of solving the puzzle with the euphoria of feeling like you've remembered something important, and at the end of the puzzle, you go inside this final structure that you've created, and you see the memory that unfolds within there. And the memories themselves are these short little they're these little vignettes where you watch a small scene unfold between just a few characters, and they're stylistically different than a traditional like video game cutscene. It's always through one vantage point, one kind of fixed camera angle, and there's no words at all. They're more of like kind of mimed scenes, and we chose that very deliberately because we wanted to allow our players to interpret the scenes, to think about how they relate to their own lives. And while we planned out the game, we had very specific ideas in mind for what each of those scenes represented. We didn't want to, kind of in a ham-fisted way, like tell you exactly what they were supposed to be, since it's so much more rewarding for you to tell us what they mean to you, and for you to try to piece them together yourselves.
Yeah, for me, in I came on to where cards fall, like I said, late in the process. But what struck me was it felt simultaneously both universal in the kinds of experiences that it's evoking, but also uh, felt like it had a ton of specificity and autobiographical content behind it. And that was a very, very real. The deeper I got into actually helping make the game, like that's was a real challenge, knowing where to pull back, allowing the team's own experiences to drive a lot of what the actual is happening in the actual scenes, and then knowing where to just certain choices with regard to art, sound, even camera. The camera is a bit at a remove, one so that you can solve puzzles or get the full scene in view, but it also parallels MC's own relationship to memory. There's a distance and remove. This is a game about nostalgia, a game about trying to piece together a past that you are distant from and that you can't fully even remember completely objectively, that are colored by all of the experiences before and after. So those choices, I think, were intentional in order to allow the player to have enough space to inject their own experiences into the narrative.
Right. And that's like, to get back to our point about the getting out of the way, it's like that choice of not having dialogue was the most intentional way that we did this, right? Like to ask the player to interpret it in the way that the character is interpreting their own memories. So like if we had thrown in the dialogue and made it very, very clear what was happening in each scene, then there's just like, you as the player don't have to interpret, don't have to engage with it. So stripping that out, often getting out of the way, means like knowing what to take out, knowing what to leave to the player. And that's just the best example of that in Where Cards Fall, I think. Often
it also means that you have to. Oh, sorry, Joel.
It's like often it's about finding where that line is for your game, finding what's important for you. Like we still, as designers and storytellers, want to tell a specific story. And Steven's saying there's a lot of that's autobiographical in there. You want to put yourself into your work, but like you want to find that line where the player still can engage with it and it can be this back and forth between you. Sorry, Sam, go ahead.
No, it's my fault for interrupting. Yeah, I think it also means having some confidence that not all of your players are going to want to engage with the narrative that you put in, and being okay with that. We knew that since Where Cards Fall is a story that was told in a way that was a lot less direct and was going to require people to search a bit more, some of our players were going to really gravitate towards that and enjoy it, and the ones that did found it tremendously rewarding and were able to relate it to different parts of their lives, and some of them were interested in doing that, and I didn't quite grasp the narrative, and we were okay with that too. That was a very conscious choice on our part.
Okay, so that's Where Cards Fall. How do we get out of the way or make space for the player in Blaseball?
Right. So I think some of the stuff we've been talking about, of like not forcing someone into a specific experience or specific narrative if they don't want it, stripping things away, like those things are very clear to see in Blaseball. Whereas Where Cards Fall, while it's still, there was a lot we left to the player, Blaseball is even further back, right? It's even further, like you go into the site and I almost describe it as when you first log in, it's almost like that moment in an open world game where it's like, cool, now you can wander wherever you want, right? There's so much there. You click in, you can explore, click around the teams, find all these players. You're really free to explore and find anything you want, right? We are at no point directing your attention, except maybe when a weird stack of crates shows up on screen and starts talking to you or something.
Joel is referencing one of the gods of Blaseball.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, but that's a good point, right? As we said, you don't want to, I think, as much as you can, not interrupt that connection between the player, the game world, and the central mechanic, or force a narrative event on a player. I'm of the mind, and I like, I'm not going to name games because I like some of these games, but like, games aren't movies and shouldn't try to be movies, in my opinion. They should be games. And so, I don't think it's a coincidence that like when we do wrest control from the players or take over their screens, it's usually some malevolent force that has showed up to like yell at them or to take away something that they care about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like just letting you click around and find the players and stuff that you care about is going to let you connect much more to the narrative than if we were to give you a Blaseball player, and say, this is the one you should care about, right? Like we've found very early on, like season 2, people just really started to connect with the narrative. We had our whole community just started telling their own stories and doing fan art of who these characters are. And we sort of expected that, but we didn't expect how much that happened. And I really contribute a lot to that, just of how free this experience was, right? We gave them 400-ish like weird names, and people were able to just click around and find the ones that they connected to and tell their stories, rather than being given the stories for them to focus on.
Yeah, especially with Blaseball, it's about building kind of a narrative ecology of emergent narrative ecology that allows people to place their focus where they want to place it. It's driven by apophenia. It's a bunch of systems happening simultaneously, and events happening simultaneously, which we'll get into in another one of our points. But I think like in terms of like clicking around, that kind of leads into the next rule or intention that we try to have when building narrative, which is in encouraging narrative designers to bury the narrative as much as you can, bury it in the game world, because that will only, if you bury enough of it deep enough, the player base will be encouraged to dig it out and to start to collectively build that lore or world building, that collective mythology together.
Right. I think this is just a good tactic for the first point, was getting out of the way, which is right. Like if the players uncover the narrative, they'll also feel much more connected to it. I think it's very easy to demonstrate on Blaseball, where it's a very systems driven game. And a lot of those systems are hidden, right? We build a system and we put it in, and we might not even expose it at first. It's just a thread that's there. And then we let the players find it either through the election or through another system. And when they uncover it, it just feels much more rewarding. It feels like they found it and they connect more to it. And just, we also have the benefit of it, since it's an emergent game based on systems, there's hidden stuff just based off of systems interacting that sometimes we don't even know about, sometimes it's just unexpected behaviors. And finding that narrative is incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, and I would say that like that allows. I would also encourage, and I think this goes hand in hand, is like the structure and shape of the game or the narrative, reflecting the structure and shape of the systems that are driving it. You just log into blaseball.com. It seems very simple and straightforward. It's a baseball sim, kind of. It's overwhelming.
Yeah,
it used to be, maybe. But but to my point, like layout. But also it changes with time. The more you pay attention, the more you have to like process the things that start to notice happening, that the things that maybe that like don't align with or start to subvert like your sense of whatever reality was in in Blaseball at least, or the promises that were made by those in the like within the game world, within positions of power. There's a dissonance there that you have to start to reconcile. But I think that like in that same kind of unraveling is also reflected like under the surface of the like or under the hood of the game. Like I think all we have the Society of Internet Blaseball Research, SIBR, who's a part of the community that popped up that started kind of scraping the site and doing deep dive analytics, writing white papers about Blaseball. And I think you just ask them, and it's if you think Blaseball seems messy on the surface, check out under the hood. It becomes this kind of like bizarre, sometimes incomprehensible mess that is then challenging the player base to grapple with the systems, get us, speculate upon the cosmology and mythology of Blaseball. I think like, forcing you to, challenge you to form a story around what you're finding, what you're digging out. Examples of that, I think, SIBR we're in the expansion era right now. SIBR is doing dynamic, like fluid physics simulations, which are helping them kind of speculate on the cosmology of Blaseball or baseball sim, or fans combing through like the glossary. We have a glossary on the site that kind of explains different rules and terms, but that's also redacted, and that leaves a ton of mystery. So it is allowing them to dig out and kind of act as archaeologists in a way, and which and discover what they can, and then go and find one another and share what they found, speculate, debate, discuss, and build that with us.
It's kind of like our Blaseball's form of environmental design, where it's like we're putting things in the environment on the site, in data, in the systems, and then, as the community wanders around and looks for it, they can find this stuff. And so it very much is, I'm thinking more and more as Blaseball.com as a world, and the world building that we're doing. And that's really our form of environmental design, is hiding these things in the environment.
Anybody that's heard of Blaseball that might not have like played it, likely heard about like necromancy from last era. And that's just an example of something that if you build something, and bury something deep enough, it can even get, when the players find it, it almost expands the sense of like realness of the world. They felt like they had found something that like maybe we didn't even know existed. And there was a lot of speculation of whether or not that could break the site or whatever. We knew that to break the illusion a little bit, like we knew that the player base would eventually find this and could exploit it if they wanted to. We just didn't know when. But that helped them.
I'm going to jump in and just talk about where cards fall a bit too, if that's cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a lot of the things we talked about with Blaseball are like putting flags in the sand that we don't explain, that are there for people to latch onto. And that's a very similar type of approach that we did with Where Cards Fall, where we put in these visual motifs that we repeated time and time again, these gigantic eyes that you would see all throughout the game, these life-size cards, and we never explain directly to the player, what these mean. But what they are mysterious elements. They're things that inspire you to dive a little deeper and to find out how they connect, overall in the world. So that type of kind of flag planting, it is an invitation to the player. It's an invitation to interpret. It's an invitation to discuss. It's an invitation to bring some of your own experiences into the game, and do a little digging and find out what this actually could represent.
Of like details that invite replay, which is great just in terms of making a product, but like also again echoes the experience that MC is going on, where you can jump back and forth once you've played through levels of Where Cards Fall. You can, and the levels are structured in a way where there are details that probably won't make a lot of sense to you upon first blush, that in retrospect, once you've played through it, start to take on new meaning, or you start to see how a relationship has changed, or that you may have seemed secondary at first, or something that seemed like an aside that is actually pretty foundational to something that happened later, so that we can kind of mirror that experience of going back through memories, trying to grapple with how did I get to where I am today.
I'll take us to our third point.
Oh yeah, I guess we should move on.
Yeah, we to keep moving. I'm gonna even reword this a little bit. So we said it like embracing your limitations and strengths also plays into this, but I'm gonna say like knowing your game and knowing how players are projecting onto your game is incredibly important, and like leaning into that. Mm-hmm. So the example, like a lot of this times this comes through in playtesting, right? Like my playtesting strategy used to be give the player the game, and for the first run, just ask them to tell the story of what happened back to me, right? Like you just see how they're narratively projecting onto the game, and you can build off of that. You can see what are players actually connecting to and build off of that. For a game like Where Cards Fall that we had to, ship, sometimes you play test that and you have to make adjustments before you ship it. With Blaseball, we're doing that constantly live. We're seeing what people are projecting onto, and we're running with that. We're building that. We have that back and forth. But it's all that stuff is built off of what your game is and what it's built around. Like with Blaseball, we had a ton of limitations. We had to build it as a very simple website. And so we saw people latch onto just these simple names. So we built around that. Like, how can I think our third set of decrees was interviews, right? Interview the players. That was the big one. And that was entirely off of seeing people connect to these players and seeing that be the way that players are projecting onto our game and saying, great, let's grab that, let's run with that, and let's build off of it. And we didn't bump into them. We added new details to the players that they wouldn't have thought of, but we ran with that. And yeah, I think just knowing your limitations and the strengths of your game and just like really thinking and being thoughtful about what your game is and how players connect to it is incredibly important.
I think it goes a little bit hand in hand with kind of an approach to just honesty in game design. Like with Where Cards Fall is a logic puzzle game. It is played through as like a sequence of puzzles that connect with each other, and we wanted the narrative to be something that fit well with that and not something that took away from it in any way. So we didn't try to add mechanics that would only service the narrative side of the game. Anytime we added narrative detail, we knew that we had to do it within the tools that we had already created. Like the puzzles themselves, the mechanics themselves, that was the language that we had to tell our story. And we weren't going to add in anything kind of outside of that. And that extended even to the perspective. So we talked a little bit about the memories before, and the whole game is shot sort of in a 3/4 view. It's a diorama-like perspective. We didn't go for any cinematic cuts. We didn't try to introduce any different types of shots that would provide for close-ups or things like that. Instead, we designed the scenes to be readable and communicate what they needed to communicate within that type of viewpoint. And it fit within the style of story that we were trying to tell as well, since it's a game that it's a story that's very much about recollection. And when you're recollecting, you're often not hyperfixating. You're often kind of searching for a broader view. So you're always seeing this world through through a vantage point. And the puzzle mechanics themselves, they speak to that. You're going through one memory, you're getting the euphoria of reaching that memory or crystallizing that memory, and then it leads you to another. So every single time in the game, we wanted to add an element to the story, or wanted to add an element to the puzzles. We thought about how they can speak to each other and made sure that we weren't adding anything that just spoke entirely to one side of it.
Yeah.
No, we're probably running up on time. Should we move on to the next
Let's
section?
do the last one. Sure.
Yeah. So narrative design, one of the other lessons that I've learned over the years is the importance of like closing doors behind your players' choices. Is, you know, how this interactive medium like is going to feel like it has stakes, or there's any weight assigned to the narrative that we want the authoring or feel like they're authoring. And where cards fall, the question there is like, how do we approach that and where cards fall? Because it's a puzzle game where you're able to go back and the focus is on that immediate problem of getting to the next door, right? I don't know. I've talked too much.
And going through memories time and time again to find new connections within them. So where cards fall itself is a fixed story. So it's not one where you can make a ton of choices that will, or any narrative driven choices that will change the way that it goes. But that said, it is somebody looking back and searching for new meaning within the choices that they've already made. And I think the closing doors part of what Stephen was bringing up is probably a little bit more metaphorical in where cards fall than literal. Every single scene starts with the closed door right behind you. One memory being wrapped up and then leads into another one. Well, with Blaseball, it ties more into the live service nature of the game, where it's a game that things are happening all the time, and when the community decides to do something, that completely locks off. You can't go back and replay previous seasons. You can't go back and see what could have happened if we didn't open the Forbidden Book. These are permanent choices that will stay within the course of the game forever.
It's definitely more explicit in Blaseball, or it's just a kind of also an evolution of thinking, probably. In Blaseball provide the ability to remake the league every single week and provide a sense of agency that I think sports fans, we've talked about this before, but that sports fans often imagine that they have when cheering for their favorite teams. Blaseball gives it to you, even if it's limited, even if it's, the individual may not have a ton of agency. Collectively, they do. But what goes hand in hand with closing doors is having things happening simultaneously, which is what Blaseball, I think, does really well. There's so much going on. You can't pay attention to absolutely everything. So you have to kind of choose where you're picking your focus. That also forces you then to rely on patience, or to go back and scrape, search through the feed or search through social media or wherever to find the rest of the narrative that, once again, you're digging out. And so then you're, collectively building that myth together.
Joe, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I think playing with permanence is just a great way to build off of the narrative you're telling on both sides, like the choices that you are putting in as a writer or designer, and then how the player's interacting with it. Like permanence just makes things feel more impactful. And so it is just a very interesting tool. It bounces off this narrative projection that we talk about super, super well. I think I just add this whole concept of narrative projection is very interesting in Blaseball, just in the community as well, because we talk a lot about how a single player might, project themselves onto the narrative you're telling in a game. But with a community-driven game like Blaseball, there's a communal narrative projecting that happens when you're defining what your team is and how things. I think Stephen was getting at this a little bit, when we're talking to each other about what happened to our team, we're working together to project on the narrative. That's a very interesting dynamic as well.
A person finds themselves in reflections of themselves in Blaseball, and then they bring that to, sometimes fuse with or impact upon or butt up against the larger communities projections, whether that's regarding the meta narrative or characters or whatever, to their own teams, rituals and chants and identities, to like just their friends that they're texting with or watching games with, like on side discords or on Twitter or wherever else they find each other.
Yeah.
Like the magic happens, I think. We always say that like it's the care that fans bring to Blaseball that provides, like, when coupled with the indifference of the sim, all of the horror that comes out of it. And then also like forces the players to engage with one another in this kind of like massive legacy game.
Yeah. I would add to that, like that communal projection onto a game. It happens in other games too, right? Like with people just talking about what happened in their single player games. That's still this communal narrative projection. Like a story arises from how you talk about games. So it applies more than just these massively multiplayer games like Blaseball.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that like that's, you know, true in our intention with like Where Cards Fall, which is meant to be a meditative experience that you're looking back on, you're thinking about, like you're getting as much of it as you put in from it as you put into it. But those are lessons learned from like single player games that we love, you know, whether that's like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, Shadow of the Colossus, or like we can talk about other games, right? Or
Well,
you know, we talk about Dark Souls all the time and stuff like that. Like this is not new, you know, but this is where we find good narrative direction lives.
Yeah. And to start to close this out, like I think this, we're not just totally just saying that like you always just like pull back and just let players do what they want to form this narrative projection, right? You can still have a game that's very, very authored. But I think what's important is knowing when to pull back, knowing what's important to you and what you want to author and put on the player, and what you want to let them do, what you want to let them project onto it. So, you know, you have a game like Where Cards Fall that I feel is like, you know, there's an authored world and these characters and a story and these memories, but we still wanted to pull back and not put dialogue and let you bring yourself to it. It's like, it almost feels like it's like 70-30 or like 60-40. It's like Blaseball is like, and that's way further back, but they still do the same concept. They still let the player bring their own experiences.
And that's assuming that you like the same types of games that we like too. You know, there's other ways to do this that are totally valid. And the great thing about games, there's so many different types of them and so many different ways of thinking. We're almost out of time, so I'm just gonna throw in a few more things here. Where Cards Fall is coming out on Steam pretty soon. It's going to be and on Switch as well. We haven't announced the release date just yet, but keep your eyes out for it. And Blaseball, you can go watch right now and play along with. Blaseball.com is where to find it. On social media, you can find Blaseball at Blaseball on Twitter and on Instagram. And Where Cards Fall is Where Cards Fall on Twitter and Instagram. We're the Game Band on Twitter. We don't have an Instagram. Sorry about that. And then I'm Sam Rosenthal on Twitter. Joel _A _Clark. Is that right?
_A _Clark. Yeah.
All right. And Steven, I'm going to let you do yours.
_Stephen Bell _ I made it easier now.
Love it.
To round out our little narrative going on in Blaseball, the Wild League is settled. All the 4 teams that were in the league.
Look at that.
And it is.
I have no idea what happened.
The Worms and Jacksons are now in party time.
Oof. All right. Yeah. Well, we have to tell Parker to.
Sorry, I was excited about the Worms.
Yeah. Sorry, Worms. And Jacksons. But
thank you to LudoNarraCon as well. We hope everybody has a great festival. A lot of great talks coming up, so keep checking them out.
Yeah.